Welcome to the Women in Vinyl podcast with Jen DiEugenio, founder of Women in Vinyl, and contributor Robin Raymond. This podcast facilitates conversations with those working in the vinyl record industry to educate, demystify, and diversify the vinyl community.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 28 of the Women in Vinyl podcast. You just heard Hollow by Dance Loud off their album, The Movement. Thanks to Kristen and Desiree of Dance Loud, a Chicago-based house electronic music DJ and drummer duo, for the use of their track. Today's guest is Karlyn King. Karyln is a popular music academic, lecturer, and researcher who teaches all over the UK. She's led on modules such as artist development and PR, sound and culture, and popular music debates, with a special interest in rock and roll history. She is currently working on a PhD at the University of Birmingham, exploring the enduring format of vinyl. She is a regular panel speaker and conference presenter on all things vinyl. If you're like us, you've often wondered why there is such a different collector culture between men and women when it comes to vinyl. Karyln's chapter in the Routledge Handbook of Women's Work in Music really breaks down the reasons this may be, citing an unconscious bias and the ways of dealing with stereotype threat, including psychological or physical avoidance, where women will distance themselves from environments or situations where this threat may be experienced, and what discourages women from audio technology, record stores, and DJ culture, and reinforces minority status. Well, Karyln, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for asking me, and thank you for doing Women in Vinyl. It's about time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
great.
are definitely one of us. And, after we spoke and you sent the chapter, we were like, we have to have her on.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think you're going to open a lot of people's eyes to things that maybe some of our guests are a little bit afraid to talk about.
Okay.
And you've actually done the research as to
Yeah.
why some gender bias exists. And so before we get into all of that, could you tell our listeners a little bit about you, what you do, and about your podcast as well?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Karlyn King, and I am a freelance popular music lecturer. I teach all over the UK. I teach everything from music business to the cultural sociology of music. And I am just finishing a PhD on vinyl records and the resurgence of vinyl in the digital era, and how that's also a kind of fake word. But the focus has really become on the kind of the lack of diversity within the vinyl consumer. And yeah, that was published in a chapter by Routledge just recently, with loads of other great women and their work as well. And I present and host the Songs Are Spells podcast, which is a fusion of music, generally artists or people in the music industry, and ideas around magic, because I feel like the two are so combined and we just don't always notice it. But for me, it's quite blatant. Yeah.
That's awesome. So how did you find your way? Was it while you were doing your PhD that you realized about the gendering issue, or was it before that?
So I'd always been somewhat conscious of it, but I think that, like a lot of things, we just kind of accept them. And it's just the way it is. And especially in the music industry, there is like a code of conduct. There's the whole sort of reciprocal thing where, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So if I wanted to work with someone, I had to honour their values and their beliefs. And always at the back of my mind was the idea that I'm, a working class woman from Glasgow, and what does this mean in this sort of, how do I relay this? But we're just not conscious of it. It's not at the forefront of our minds, and that's what I wanted to do with the research. But I didn't know that at the start when I applied. I thought I just wanted to look at why records were popular again, why they were being sold in like lifestyle stores and supermarkets. And that became the sort of boring part, to be honest. Like they're the fact of the matter is they've always been popular with different markets, and there's definitely a kind of hipster element to it, and it's also bringing more younger people into it as well, which is good. But the gendering was something that I also noticed in, for example, lifestyle stores like Urban Outfitters, on the specific floors, like for men and for women. They would have certain records that they wouldn't have on other floors and stuff like that.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
So then I was like, because the whole point, and my supervisor kept saying, you really want to say something new. What can you say that's new about this? So that was part of the reason I wanted to delve into it as well, was not just to write a really good original PhD, but was to actually open up the conversation and bring light to people, because vinyl's not going anywhere.
Right.
If anything, it's growing, right? So
let's hope so. I would still like to have a job. I mean, but that's exactly it, though. You're not just like shining light on it, but you're actually like speaking truth to this thing that we know.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the Harry Potter kind of analogy, where it's like the guy that must not be named, and you're like, don't talk about dudes being dicks. They don't know. And if we don't tell them, they won't know. But we know, and we know how terrible it is, but nobody wants to be like, hey, excuse me, sir, excuse me, because we don't want that put back on us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean,
the backlash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's very much like why we were super excited to talk to you about it, because we've all had a negative interaction,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody wants to, especially people that are employed in vinyl right now, like nobody wants to be like, oh yeah, yesterday at blah this happened and it was really terrible and it made me feel like blah, because they're worried about retaliation, they're worried about being like the loudmouth bitch, and like having this whole like blowback.
Mm-hmm.
So that you're actually doing research and you're like, yeah, it's not just a figment of your beep beep imagination, it's a very real thing, and now you can study it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's awesome.
So I mean, it's chef's kiss.
And we all read the chapter, and so we have some things that we're sort of pulling out that we want to dive into with you.
Oh,
and
cool.
I think
Yeah.
so. The first quote of the chapter says, "You would think with women being more suited to the home life, they would actually be more into record collecting than men. And the ideology being that men are serious when it comes to vinyl technology and women are not." So this is crazy to me, because I often get asked why, like, I guess I've just never understood why it's weird for women to be collectors of things. I mean, when we're kids, maybe they collected Barbies, if we're going to be stereotypical right now, So it's like, why is that so strange? When it comes to something like records. And so you you did dive into that. So where did that stem from?
So I had to start by reading all of the literature. So
Yeah, when did that part start? Because I know I had to read the chapter like 3 times to get my like basic brain around it, where I was like, oh, okay, expand that concept. Okay. And like look at other things and look up words, because that's a thing for me too. But like, how long did it take you to do the research to get into that part where you were like informed to write that?
I mean, that would have been around 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to interject there, but yeah, so you said you were reading all of the literature, and where did it come from?
Yeah, and so my supervisor said, so you need to look at sound studies, you need to look at collector studies, and just gave me the kind of key words to begin with. So I started to look at collector studies, and again, there's not much written on it. There's really not much, but what it does say is that collecting is gendered, and there's higher value attributed to something that's technological, and typically that would be in the masculine domain. And that, you know, really transpires in music in terms of like the studio environment and engineering and production and all these, and I guess other STEM subjects we call them. That's still very much a thing. And it was considered that a lot of collectors who are men are quite sort of geeky or maybe even like neurodiverse as well now, in that they would obsess and it would be something like a cause of anxiety if they didn't have the full collection. And I guess we see that in movies like High Fidelity, right? We see that
I see it when I look in the mirror. Come on.
Yeah, this is the thing. And then people have also tried to say that like neurodiversity is much more of a masculine thing as well. I believe that the figures say that it had been, but that's all down to like diagnosis and coming forward and actually voicing it as well. So the data is not entirely clear. But yeah, it's typically been serious collectorship's been attributed to men, and that's definitely the case with records. But that's crazy because women, back in the kind of post-war, women would have been the ones choosing the phonograph and selecting the records, but for different reasons. It was typically to make the home look good. So we're back to this aesthetic element, which is different to the technology element.
Did you find in your research that women were using them then too, if they were selecting the objects?
Yeah, that is certainly the case. And even in like women's magazines like Cosmopolitan and stuff like that, they were saying, yeah, buy this one, this is good, this sounds better and stuff like that. So yeah, they were definitely using them. But the marketing was much more at how does it look and a little bit on how it sounds and will it be okay in the home? Will it, you know, disturb the ambience? And will I be able to use it to educate my children as well?
Yeah. I think it was interesting because at some point in the article, and it may have been later in time, you were talking about the same sort of thing with this, what almost sounded like women influencers in magazines and stuff. I thought that was so interesting because it's like almost how people are marketing again today in some cases, you know, through Instagram and finding women to market in particular.
So back then the magazines would just have been targeting them, and then I guess it would have been word of mouth. So the woman next door to me has this turntable, maybe I'll get that, and it's and things like that. So the age old, I guess influence is not a new thing, but we just use that word, don't we? Like the Instagram influencer.
Mm-hmm.
But that would have been the equivalent back then, kind of post-war. Post World War II. Yeah.
Because would they have to go in, like, there was like a showroom kind of scenario where they would have to go and pick out their cabinet too, right? Like it wasn't like a mail order thing where there was
there was no Amazon.
I'll take cabinet number 6543, thanks, and then it would show up at their door because they actually had to go do the thing. So
totally. And it's so funny because even now that kind of going to a shop, listening to all the examples, talking to the salespeople, that still holds more value in phonograph technology land than maybe in other, you know, like buying clothes online or whatever. That holds much more value still. And I looked at that in a shop in Glasgow called Loud and Clear Glasgow. Shout out to them. They're a really, really good sort of high-end audio store, and you don't just pop in, you know, and buy something quickly. You go in for like the day.
Yeah.
You sit and they have like a fake living room and all that, and you can sit and imagine that it's your listening room at home. And
wow.
Yeah, it's incredible.
How was that interaction when you went in there? Were there kind of gender aspersions that they cast on you for like, oh, lady, you walked into the wrong store. Get out. Like, you don't belong in here, ma'am.
So I would feel like there's always a bit of that. So they kind of look at you like, why are you here? Also, they didn't really know me at that point. And then I attended like a listening event in the store, and it was something like 6 men plus 1 man who had brought a woman who I'm assuming was a partner. And then me at the back. And what I noticed was that when people were asking questions and things like that, it was always the men. It was the men saying, "I can hear it. I can hear the difference. This is good. This is bad." And this woman was just kind of sat there as if she would, she didn't really have a voice at all. And then there was me at the back asking kind of awkward questions because I'm like the sort of Louis Theroux in the room.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was just kind of there.
I love it.
But it definitely threw some people, and you could see some of the participants sort of looking at me as if, what?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an example of an awkward question that you asked?
It would be things like, how do you know that this is better when you've been here, 10 minutes? Wouldn't you need like your home system to make that comparison? Just things like that, which I didn't think was rude or anything. I thought it was a legitimate research question. But in hindsight now, that definitely would have came across as a bit rude because they didn't really know who I was or what I was doing.
Well, and that's not the kind of thing that they would expect because, again, sort of bringing back to the chapter is this thought of what you called an invisible knapsack or an unapparent privilege. So, so what does that mean, and how would people identify the fact that they're maybe projecting that?
Yeah, so that's Peggy McIntosh. The privilege that we have that we're not even aware of until someone literally shoves it in our face.
Yeah.
So the fact that men can walk into a record store and not be judged, and maybe be judged as knowledgeable in a positive light, that's their privilege, and to them it's an invisible knapsack of privilege, and it's something that they've never questioned. And what really proves that is the research when I did interview men and they were like, "We don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean there's a gender bias?" No. The fact that they're so unaware of like women's experience in the record store shows that it's just something that's never crossed their mind. So it's an unconscious form of privilege.
Even to the point that you were just making, though, I think like if a guy had asked that question, he probably would not have gotten a strange look. It's like, prove to me why this is better here.
Yeah.
But when you asked it, you're like, this might be an awkward question. And I think that's sort of something that we as women do. I find a lot of times if I'm following up with someone, I'll say, I'm just checking in. And I've had to consciously be like, remove just, check in, And so there's no reason for me to tiptoe or apologize around doing something like that. But I think your example of, being in the store and asking that question is a good, it proves that point in a way.
Yeah, and I had to really sort of shout to be heard as well. So yeah, and it could have felt quite uncomfortable at times, but like you say, it's pushing through that apologetic stance that, because I have as much right to be there as them. So
I mean, even more so because of it coming from like a research educational perspective where you have more than a legitimate reason to be there and ask these questions. So.
Well, what's so funny about that is that when those people, and as soon as I walk into a store as well, people automatically, so I present, as quite a feminized woman, yeah, I would go in with like the red lipstick and at the time the long blonde hair and all that. And also people think I'm younger than I am as well. And, I have quite a high vibe. I'm very like positive. And if they're used to kind of grey men going in, who kind of hate their life and everyone else, I'm I'm an anomaly. And that impacts how they respond.
Yeah. It's interesting how it translates to so many different fields, but I think, even my sister has talked about that if she finishes a sentence with a period, she might be, looked at as being curt or something versus, just as not an exclamation point. But yeah, I think, with vinyl, we have the added collector thing on top of the business aspect. So, and then it's all encompassing with STEM, like you mentioned. So, and that's science, technology, engineering, and math for anyone that doesn't know that at this point. So yeah, I think it's sort of all encompassing all of those different things.
And you mentioned an internalized patriarchal privilege in the chapter
Yeah.
as well, and like encompassing privilege and gender capital theories. Can you break those down for everyone so that they can kind of wrap their
Yeah,
minds around
sure.
those too?
So the whole idea of capital is like currency, and it's not just, monetary currency. It can be, like we said at the start, the idea that you kind of have to network and keep people sweet in the music industry. So that's very much like social capital, who you know, your network. And then you have like cultural capital, which is, how much you know your skills, what you can offer, what kind of level you're at, that kind of thing. And gender capital is certainly in this industry is the fact that men do wield more power and find it easier, and in most industries, compared to, let's say, women or maybe non-binary people as well. And yet, internalized patriarchal capital is just taking that a step further, and it's taking the idea of like the invisible knapsack and translating it into just another form of currency. And you do see it. So you see men being sort of slipped like the rare issues and stuff like that under the counter. And, you do see them being booked for more shows, and just the lack of awareness around it. That's what I mean by internalized patriarchal capital. But the fact that they keep using it to get ahead means that it's currency for them, and they'll keep doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's sort of that on the flip side, the imposter syndrome for a lot of us. I know,
Yeah.
like for me, part of the reason why when I first started Women in Vinyl, I didn't want to be part of documentaries or lectures or honestly even a podcast was because of that. I didn't feel confident in what I know, even though I know it backwards and forwards. I talk about it every single day, but that was sort of the issue for me was that comfort level of people being like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She hasn't been doing this for 20 years. It doesn't mean that I haven't been touching records and playing records for 20 years. I just haven't been in the industry that long pressing records because it wasn't a thing that I even knew existed. So I think that is really interesting on the flip side to think about too, and how we hold ourselves back potentially in some cases.
Definitely. So that's the whole Sheryl Sandberg thing, isn't it, from Facebook? The whole idea of leaning in, even if you feel like an imposter, lean in anyway.
Yeah.
Ask the awkward questions. Be like Louis Theroux.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the only way of addressing the balance.
Right.
And I guess we're all doing that. We're all doing that like 100-fold. Like with what we do, yeah. So hopefully that will help other people to maybe consider doing it and taking that first step.
Right.
I guess we need to cultivate some like internalized capital then. We need to cultivate that in ourselves. Because I get like that as well. So when people ask me what to do, sometimes I kind of maybe underplay it a little bit. And it's only when, I talk to women like you that I'm like, wait a minute.
And do you feel like it's because we just are so used to it that we just kind of are like, oh, well, that's the way that it is. So there's no use talking about it because it's always going to be like that.
Yeah, it's almost like I don't want to be challenged. I don't want to, like some people use this term battle fatigue. Like I don't want to have to justify it. If a guy's like, what, you do this, you cut records, and they'll be like, really? And they'll question it, and they'll be like, for how long? Where?
Totally.
And it does become fatiguing. It's battle fatigue. And I'd rather not deal with that.
I mean, I feel like that's the thing. Like there's like pockets of them, but they're starting to come along.
Yeah, we've got a lot of support for sure from men with Women in Vinyl.
That's great to hear. Yeah,
and I think that's been, one of the things that's great about having you here is, again, that there's some sort of research behind it, because I feel like a lot of times if we had this episode, if like Robin and I had just had it, or our board had just had it, it could come across, I guess, as like a bitch fest. And but it's true, we're not making this stuff up. It goes all the way back in time. So I think that's really interesting to back it up with something.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we're not trying to hate on anyone.
Right.
But we're talking about like factual academic research that has shown that there is a divide, and
Mm-hmm.
it all boils down to exhibition of knowledge, really, and the way that we have to prove ourselves. And it's not just as women, it would be for people who don't have a gender identity, and also we see it a lot in people of colour, for example.
Right.
Um, I was in a lecture the other day about race, ethnicity, and the music industries, and I had a guest lecturer in, the wonderful Jay Chambers, who is always on BBC News. He's great. He's a dub poet and an activist, and he got the people of colour in the room talking about this. Not that they have to, but they chose to, and they said, "I have to fight twice as hard as my white equivalent." So yeah, this is intersectional. I wasn't able to go that far and do the intersectional analysis of it, but I really, really hope someone does.
Yeah. That was one of the questions that I had actually was like if you saw a difference for women versus the LGBTQ plus community and minority communities in this bias. I mean,
So I only met one woman of colour in the whole time I was going into record shops.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that was in Brixton in London, and she was the owner.
wow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What's her shop called so we can get some butts in her record store?
Totally. It's called Pure Vinyl.
Pure vinyl. Okay.
Yeah. And I feel like she had a little bit of battle fatigue. Like she didn't really want to go there, to be honest. She just wanted to get on with running her business. And that's totally understandable. But yeah, that is true. I only ever met one woman of colour in the whole research that I did. I was, of course, trying to get as diverse a sample as possible,
Yeah.
but that was all I saw in my observations. So there's absolutely an intersectional divide there. And I really want someone to come along and further research that because, again, it's just been accepted.
Right.
That's shocking.
Yeah.
I can't find women in certain fields in this industry to diversify things as much as I would like to. And one of the points is that we want to do that in this project that we're working on. But they just don't exist in some cases. And so if anyone out there is listening and knows of, more diverse communities within cutting and plating and pressing, I mean, please let us know, because I worry sometimes that it will appear a certain way if, there's only diversity within like DJing, for example, or
Yeah.
record stores. There's other opportunities out there too. So, yeah.
That is really interesting. If we could do a kind of census of that, if people were willing to, to say, I'm here, I'm doing it, but I've been kind of erased from the narrative.
Right.
I guess the famous example of that would be the Doctor Who theme. Yeah, and Delia Derbyshire, who was put down as like maybe a studio assistant or something, but actually she composed and engineered it.
She did the whole damn thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's still used today. It's been obviously tweaked and everything, but that's her work. Yeah.
But pre-World War II, it was kind of perceived that vinyl was gender neutral, but I mean, it wasn't. But why do you think that there was like a perception that it was like, oh, records are for everybody?
Yeah, so that was from looking at things like the printed press and adverts and stuff like that, and it seemed that it was aimed at everyone, really.
Right.
But it was the use of electronics in the Second World War and the tinkering with technology and the training that people, predominantly men, got during that time, and for them to come back and take that on as a hobby or a
Right.
specialism and expertise was really what started to cause this divide, and then that filtered into advertising and print media. And I mean, there's some horrendous adverts, things like cartoons of men sort of trying to go into a record shop where there's a woman dragging her man into a shoe shop and stuff like that.
One of those memes is what started Women in Vinyl.
Really?
Yeah, there was the one, it was a guy who's holding a record and his wife is knitting,
Oh
and
my God.
he's trying to like nerd out with her about the pressing that he's holding, and she is basically like, I could care less. And every single person, I swear, every single person on Instagram reposted this thing talking about their wives.
Oh my
And
God.
I kept commenting, like, get a woman that can do both. Like, it was making me crazy. So, yeah, it spawned this, like, look into all of the women that were doing really cool things and leading labels and pressing plants and all of this stuff and not getting the same kind of recognition. That the fact that people would post that and think it was okay, it wasn't. And so, yeah, that's sort of what spawned the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean that wasn't even a meme back then. That was real. That was a real
Right.
advert, and it was just accepted. Again, it goes back to this idea of we just accept things.
Yeah.
So people accepted that, and then it filters into language, stuff like sound man and hi-fi man and all this. Yeah.
What are some of the most interesting, long-lasting trends that you've found? I was happy that in your extensive research, I connected the dots before I saw Crosley.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, and then a couple sentences later, I was like, oh, hey. But
Totally.
and no disrespect or shade on Crosley, but it is very interesting in the way that they market. So what did you find with that?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have their place. They've brought a lot of like children into vinyl, which is fantastic. And they're like sort of entry level first record player. There's nothing wrong with that. But
Oh, we celebrate
yeah.
that here.
Yeah, absolutely. But I certainly know people who would like turn their nose up at that. Um, but that's not cool because that's not what we're trying to achieve. But what Crosley have done is they've taken one of the longer standing embedded ideas that women only buy vinyl record players or turntables if they look good. Yeah. And the whole sort of pastel colours, particularly the pink one, was all over Instagram. It's very Instagrammable. It's aesthetic. It's all about the aesthetic. And then people started to criticize and say these aren't real record players, they'll ruin your records, blah, 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 blah. This is all just about the look. But you could argue that all facets of life are now that, because let's face it, we live in Instagram land.
You kind of have to appreciate their market analysis to understand the buying power of women and female identifying people that are, maybe a little bit more concerned with aesthetics. That's fine. But that they've empowered that buying sector to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to get a turntable. This is cool. But did you see that in the research at all, where it was like very targeted towards like the buying potential of women and women identifying people, and how they were trying to like encapsulate or use that to their advantage?
Totally, yeah. And I mean, it's kind of smart in many ways. And yeah, lots of women did buy those pink turntables, and that's fine. They do look good, but I guess the issue is that it's then reinforcing a kind of stereotype that that's all women want, and that's the only way that they'll engage with audio technology is if it looks good in the living room or whatever. So that's where the issue lies. And there is like a parallel story with the Gibson guitars, the
Daisy
ones,
Rock.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
Daisy Rock as well. So I think it was Gibson that brought out the Goddess guitar,
Right.
and it was like a smaller guitar, and it was aimed specifically at women who they felt would always be smaller than their main guitarists' counterparts. I mean, again, it's just reinforcing the stereotype that women can only access this field if they have women-shaped kit.
Right.
And that's just not true.
Right.
But we're at such an interesting time, and really, like, my students have taught me so much about this recently. This idea that maybe these sort of gendered ideas are out of date now.
Yeah.
Maybe, we're old fashioned now. And in 10 years' time, it's just not going to be a thing. Like, gender's just not a thing. And the idea that sort of fluidity and stereotypes will be seen as this really sort of dinosaur idea, that's what I'm starting to see in my students. And it's actually really exciting.
Yeah. On that note, I think that that's a really good segue. One of our last questions, which was, how do you think that as a community we can begin to break the gender bias? Like, what do you think we could do to break it down and make people aware? Because I think that's the biggest first step is, what are you doing that's causing this and how can you be better?
Yeah, so as a community, I would say offering a safe space for people to report when maybe they have been treated badly in a record store, because that immediately takes away this assumption that it's just the way it is and that we just have to tolerate it. So having a place where they could come and say, this happened, this wasn't okay, what do you think? And actually see it from another point of view, I think is great. And you already do that, so yeah. Visibility, so the fact that your platform is so visible and also really, really popular as well. Like, this is not a minority group. This is, this isn't some really like obscure thing. It's really popular, and that just shows that women have been desperate for an outlet and a platform like this. Educating staff in places like record shops and any sort of record-based place, educating them that at the end of the day, actually a record store owner said this to me. He said, at the end of the day, customers are paying our wages, so why would we be discriminatory? Why would we be weird with them?
Hold that thought. It's time for an Amanda Fact.
The first live performance recording was made on May 31st, 1926, at the Royal Opera House at Covent Gardens in central London. And it was all made possible thanks to the improvements in the recording process to sound collection innovated during the electric era. Before now, you just could not capture details in live recording. So the first ever live album, what was it, you might ask? It was an opera, go figure. An Italian opera, actually, performed by a Russian singer in central London. That night, they were captured 9 sides of recorded material. Ultimately, 4 sides were successfully enough recorded to be mass-produced and released. The opera was actually, I'm going to butcher the name of this, so you'll have to, forgive me. It's called Mephistophele, and it's a story about Faust's deal with the devil, and that is very rock and roll.
You all know by now that Robin and I are on opposite ends of the record organizational spectrum, but one thing we do agree on, how fantastic Keppel Design's record dividers and record blocks are. Beautifully handcrafted by expert craftswomen in San Francisco, Keppel dividers are sleek, sophisticated, customizable, and built to last. No matter how you organize, Keppel are the dividers to use. Get $10 off your first order of $85 or more using code WOMENINVINYL at checkout. www.keppeldesign.com. That's KOEPPEL design.com. And now, back to the episode. What about to that Instagram community that can tend to objectify? Like, what would you say to the community as a whole as far as being better at allowing women the space to not only present their records however they would like, but also in commenting and like your response to that? How can people be more open to these types of conversations on social media where people are sharing music and approach it from a place where they're not putting out the invisible knapsack or privilege?
Yeah, I love it. Wow. So I guess this again comes down to education. So calling it out, people who try and, troll you, calling that out, actually calling it out publicly. I've seen a lot of people, rather than just sort of block someone, they've actually like shared the post and been like, look what I got. And really just publicly calling this out, because this is the other power that comes with the social media, is that we can do that. Like, yeah, we can post pictures with our records, but we can also call out people who try and shit on that. Yeah.
Right.
So it works. Yeah, there's multiple ways that it works. So I would certainly advocate for that. And then block them probably as well. Yeah, definitely. Because again, it's about protecting your peace and your energetic space, which is so important now more than ever.
Yeah, I think that's the message that maybe I would put out there, is that like, don't assume that the person who's posting doesn't know, and think about it before you comment. Maybe you could reframe it in a way that's starting a conversation versus explaining to the person something that they may already know.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
or just let people live their lives. Don't comment.
Yeah.
Just like it or move along.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So just protect your peace in the first instance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any other similar threads in gender bias that you uncovered while you were researching the chapter? Like with record stores, with any other kind of examples?
I guess another one that really stands out would be that when women are working there as staff, and there was an interesting incident when a woman chose to sort of distance herself from any chat around gender in the record store. Could be battle fatigue, could be that she just doesn't identify a problem potentially. That's great if she doesn't. But yeah, I did see that some women were reluctant to engage in the conversation. But they were always women that were in a store where a man had openly said there's not an issue.
Really?
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is
So
very
can
interesting.
you take us through like how that would go down? Like when you went into a record store, like what was your interaction like when you were like, hey, I'm here on research? Like,
Yeah.
say like, this isn't a
Yeah.
bookstore, lady. Like,
Yeah.
you're in the wrong place.
Yeah. So again, I would go in. I would be like really kind of upbeat. Also, I wasn't always researching in Scotland. It was UK wide, so they would hear my accent and make judgments on that as well. And yeah, this is
People
it.
from Scotland can't enjoy music.
Yeah, apparently so. Yeah, and as soon as I said, I'm doing a PhD at University of Birmingham, a Russell Group university. I'm looking at records and what they mean today. Would you have 5 minutes? A lot of people would be like, yeah, of course, fantastic. This is my area. Yeah. But then occasionally, yes, some people would be like, oh, we're so bored of this. There's no resurgence. Leave us alone. Yeah, just leave us be. Yeah. Or that I was maybe sort of sensationalizing it a bit, which I wasn't at all. Yeah, and then those little, or I would maybe say something like, well, I'm quite interested in, what kind of customers you get, how diverse is your customer base, who's your typical customer, and they would always say, well, it's usually just local white men. Yeah, and I'd be like, why do you think that is? And they would say, well, it's just a man's thing, isn't it? And then the women would sort of disappear into the back. Yeah. So I guess there's loads of ways you could interpret that, and that they don't want to get into it, they don't want to bring attention to it, they don't want to address it, or they just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, that brings up another kind of maybe question for me, where do you think it's because of like the pay gap and the accessibility of discretionary income for white men of varied educational backgrounds or whatever, that are making more money, so they've had more access to technology and
Yeah, well, that's certainly what the data on things like the pay gap would suggest,
Yeah.
is that they will have more disposable income, and records are not cheap, so, as you know well. So yeah, it is more of a luxury item.
Right.
It is, and that's absolutely a factor in terms of accessibility, income level, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of my students that I would do focus groups with my students, they would say we would absolutely buy more records, but we just can't afford them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's when you tell them to go to a good used shop.
Yeah.
Like how epic is your collection?
It's really diverse. So I really like to collect a lot of 90s hip hop.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I've also got all the classics, all the Rumours or different Beatles records or whatever. Um, a student actually gave me a record, her own record that she'd made, and she'd sort of got it pressed and distributed it herself,
Nice.
which is fantastic.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, she's like 19 and she went and did that herself, and I thought that was really
I
cool.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a whole mix of things like that, things people have given me, a lot of hip hop,
Yeah.
old rock, some random Scottish indie, and a lot of Johnny Cash as well.
Amazing.
Nice. Well, with this talk of collections,
Oh yeah.
we have a question that we ask as our final question to our guests, which is if you could create a 7-inch record with anything on the A side and anything on the B side, what would you make?
Oh my God. So I recently did something similar. It was a playlist of 10 songs, and they had to be in the order that they appeared on the original album.
Interesting.
So I'm going to pick some stuff from that as well.
Fine. That's totally fine.
Yeah, so I guess I would go for, the first track on that, which was Most Deaf, and it was Fear Not of Man.
Cool.
I mean, that's also relevant for the conversation.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
I think, I would go. That's just such a great album opener. And actually, the first time I even heard that album was on a record that my friend played in a pub in Glasgow. So, so that's just a fantastic opening to an album. It's all about where are we at? And I mean, this was like the early 90s, and he's saying, like, this is where we're at now. A lot of things are changing, a lot of things are coming. But mind over matter, soul before flesh is like the line in it. So it's
Nice.
like, basically like go inward and don't let people bring your vibe down, and so much
So
relevance
perfect.
on that whole album.
Yeah, that's a good one. I feel like
Yeah.
that's the song that you got to play when you walk in to do your lectures now.
Oh my God, you're
It's like your hype song. You're just like, all right, kids,
got her
I'm gonna
boom
drop
box,
some
right?
knowledge on you. Get ready.
I've just visualized that perfectly. That's gonna happen.
I love it. We're gonna get you on. We're gonna book you a TED Talk. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, I just love that. And I guess like for a B-side, did you say for a B-side as well?
Yeah.
It would be what was the other? Yeah, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna go with The Prodigy.
Yes.
Awesome.
I think the song I picked was Breathe on that playlist. So yeah,
Awesome.
I'm gonna go for Breathe because Prodigy were the first festival band that I saw when I think I was only 16, and I ran off to the Leeds Festival to see The Prodigy and Guns N' Roses.
I just
Oh yeah. Now
I
we're talking.
I just rebought that record, The Prodigy.
Oh really?
So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, they
So
reissued it and I was like, I need this.
Oh my God, it's amazing. So yeah, actually anything by The Prodigy, but yeah, I would go with Breathe.
Nice.
And I just remember it being like just spectacular and just like genre bending and just unbelievable. And I can't say I've ever seen a show that's been like it ever since.
Yeah, those guys
So
were
cool.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be my picks.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Karyln. This was great. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's been amazing.
So
It kind of
much.
feels like we're in the same room.
When we make it over to the UK, we will be.
Yeah.
It'll be great.
So, all going well, I'll be in the US at the end of June.
Oh, nice.
Or what? Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the hype machine. Tell us all the things that you're into. give us the notes, the places that people can find you and follow you, not in a creepy way, but in the best possible way. Support you and get into your research and
Yeah, so hopefully I'll be doing a little bit of panel chat at the Making Vinyl conference.
Oh, great.
Oh,
I know that they're still very much deciding how it's going to look, but hopefully, yeah,
amazing.
I can be discussing this research there. I haven't booked like my trip yet or anything. My plan was to come over and go to Nashville for like a week and then go to Memphis for maybe the final week.
Nice.
But I guess I'm kind of holding off to see is everything like it's just the world we live in, right?
Yeah.
Everything's a little bit tumultuous. So I would really, really hope that goes ahead. And yeah, people can follow me on Instagram at Karlyn King, L for Louise. And the podcast is at the Songs Are Spells podcast. And hopefully Jen's episode will be with you very soon. And yeah, what other else do I have? Twitter as well. That's Karlyn L. King, but mainly Instagram. Just because.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, and the podcast has a TikTok at Songs Are Spells podcast as well.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Time. That was awesome.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your evening.
You too when it comes.
Well, take care. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks so
Talk
much.
to you
Helen.
soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
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 Thanks for joining us on the Women in Vinyl podcast. You can join our ever-growing list of sponsors, other record labels, Selector, Couple Design, Eargasm, Groove Washer, Glowtronics, New Gen Audio, and Vinyl Revolution Record Show. And thanks for sponsoring the show. Hey, as always, you can join our conversation on Instagram or send us a note at media@womeninvinyl.com. Clock us, send us info. If you have a question, we got the answer, or we'll find it. We won't lie to you. And check out womeninvinyl.com for past episodes, the store, the job board, and the library of resources. Don't forget to like and subscribe and give us a review on your favorite podcast delivery method. You can also contribute to furthering our mission at patreon.com/womeninvinyl. Hey, guess what? This episode, 45 minutes. You know there was more. You want more? You get more. Go to patreon.com and you can get more. And you'll find all the B-sides, the deep cuts, and the amazing extras, including longer episodes, and contribute to the creation of scholarships and educational opportunities to further the demystification, the infiltration of more women and non-binary identifying humans into the vinyl making space, decreasing those turnaround times every week. Yeah, we love your records. We want you to love them too. womeninvinyl.com.
This episode has been brought to you by Women in Vinyl and Red Spade Records. Thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe, and you can always contact us directly by visiting www.womeninvinyl.com.